When I first became involved with the issue of water some 6 years ago, what really captured my imagination was the term integrated water resource management, or more specifically, the single word integrated. Integrated with what was the immediate unspoken question that popped up in my mind. Now, with a book and a full-blown water presentation created in partnership with the Duarte Group, who did the original creative for Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth behind me, I have at least a portion of the answer. Water is basically integrated with everything. Agriculture, industry, human development, urbanization and population growth, energy, poverty, disease, and survival itself. The facts bear this out, and they're often surprising. Here's one. While the average American consumes about 3 liters of water a day, the average daily American diet requires about 3,000 liters of water to create. So our average individual daily dietary consumption of water in the U.S. isn't 3 liters, it's 3,003 liters. That's the kind of figuring that people who think hard about scarce natural resources and who plan ahead do. They integrate the facts and figures. And just when I thought I had my arms around one scarce resource and its impact on our planet, along comes a second one, petroleum, with surprising reach and impact once again on everything, including health. Let's take a look at petroleum. First, petroleum is a unique, energy-dense, non-renewable, at least in our lifespan, resource. In the U.S., we reached our highest level of production in the 1970s, and we've been declining ever since. Conservative estimates are that the peak production globally will be reached at about 2030 or sooner, and thereafter, production and supply declines with destabilizing effect. Why destabilizing? Well, petroleum is the primary building block for heating oil, propane, and all transportation fuels. In addition, it's the starting point for the entire chemical industry and compounds critical to the creation of polymers, resins, and a range of other products which in turn yield plastics, textiles, lubricants, solvents, pesticides and insecticides, and even human medicines. As the supply of petroleum declines, the demand for petroleum is growing thanks to population increases, expanding economies, new prosperity, and new uses for the product. As with water, petroleum consumption goes hand in hand with agriculture. Arguably, the Green Revolution of the 1950s, attributable to mass mechanization, centralized farming, modern irrigation, these special seeds, insecticides, and the explosive growth of nitrogen fertilizers which allowed monoculture farming post-World War II, was made possible by the ready availability of petroleum. And while a good argument could be made that this mass farming has created new and even more worrisome dilemmas, the reality is that today we produce enough food for about 6 billion global citizens, an estimated 10 times the amount that could have been produced prior to industrialized farming. But studies also show that to produce a single calorie of food today, a single calorie, we consume 50 calories of fossil fuel energy. And that's not counting transportation costs, which are on the increase in the U.S. Why? Well, because 23% of our fruits, 17% of our vegetables, and nearly 70% of our seafood comes from overseas. The agricultural sector, of course, isn't the only consumer of energy. Petroleum and its byproducts heat most of our homes and businesses. Petroleum only fuels about 3% of our electricity production, but it keeps most of our backup generators going. And for motor vehicles, progress in electric cars and hybrids aside, without petroleum, our daily lives would pretty much grind to a halt. What does all of this have to do with healthcare? Well, let's take a quick look at healthcare without petroleum. First, pharmaceuticals from aspirin to antibiotics currently use it, though substitutes could be found if it was necessary. Medical supplies like bandages, syringes, catheters, oxygen masks, surgical instruments, radiologic dyes, hearing aids, prostheses, and technologic applications from chips to computers to sensors consume petroleum in their production. Health workers would have difficulty getting to you and you to them, absent petroleum to carry us along. Ambulances, helicopters, and aircraft that carry personnel, organs for transplant, critical patients, and critical equipment would be grounded. Is there any positive health side to a world with scarce petroleum? Well, obviously, we would use the material more cautiously. That means more mass transportation, more bicycles, more walking, and therefore more exercise, greater fitness, possibly fewer automobile casualties, cleaner air, and a more stable climate situation. All good. There are some localized examples of rather immediate positive health impacts with decreased autocongestion, as in the documented drop in childhood asthma attacks coincident with Atlanta's hosting of the 1996 Summer Olympics. It's also probable that restrained use of petroleum would result in greater reliance on local food production, pushing the American diet closer to fresh and green and farther away from processed. But at the end of the day, as with water, petroleum scarcity spells trouble and stress to public health officials, who note that while nations have traditionally made peace when it comes to sharing water, they've been inclined to make war when it comes to oil. So public health leaders have begun to call for serious scenario planning and rapid response capabilities, as has been done for everything from bird flu to terrorist attacks. Specifically, when it comes to health and welfare of America's citizens, they recommend the following. Number one, efficiency, conservation, recycling, and reducing wasteful overconsumption to not only use the remaining petroleum wisely, but also advantage the positive fallout of increased exercise, cleaner air, and moderated global warming. Two, localization, the reinforcement of systems and services close to the customer rather than halfway around the globe. Number three, redundancy, having backup supplies and systems in place should a natural or man-made disaster result in acute shortage of supply. When I started discussing water 6 years ago, it didn't exactly resonate. It does now. We can expect the same thing with petroleum because it too touches everything. Certainly over the next decade and perhaps much sooner, this challenge and its disruptive impact will be obvious to us all. If we continue down the road of chaos and warfare through whatever tortured logic we manage to provide, we'll find further disruption of supply, larger numbers of migratory and displaced human populations, and less capacity for governance, oversight, planning, and reasoned execution. And while that certainly means misery for many of our brethren who live on the margins, it also means a very different world for each and every one of us. For Health Commentary, I'm Mike McGee.